It's called Grand Am.
Back in 1985, Pontiac brought back a name it had tried to use on two different models in the 1970s, the Grand Am. Although it failed in the 70s, Pontiac's third attempt was a winner, eventually becoming one of their best-selling cars. This is the story of the Pontiac Grand Am. This is my old car.
And you know what that means.
We build excitement.
Thanks for all the suggestions to do a review of the Pontiac Grand Am. This is my first full review of a Pontiac model, and I will definitely review other Pontiac models in future episodes. Also check out my new Patreon page at patreon.com/myoldcar, where you can participate in polls to choose cars for future episodes, or to get early ad-free access to future videos. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you may think the Grand Am first hit the road in 1985. But 1985 is actually the third time Pontiac tried to use the Grand Am name. The name originated by combining the names of two of their other models, the Grand Prix and the Trans Am. The thinking at the time was to emulate what they had seen with cars from BMW and Mercedes, to make a car that combined features of both luxury and sports cars. So Pontiac combined the names of their luxury and sports car offerings. The resulting car was the 1973 Grand Am, built on GM's A-body platform that was shared with two other Pontiacs, the Le Mans and GTO, and also the Chevy Chevelle, Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, and the Buick Century. Built in both 2- and 4-door body styles, the Grand Am was unique in that it had what would later become a Pontiac trademark, a flexible plastic nose which could return to its original shape after a minor collision. However, the Grand Am arrived at one of the worst times in automotive history, with a gas crisis forcing GM to start reducing the output of their V8 engines. Although a 7.5-liter 240 horsepower version was available, the standard 6.6-liter made 170 horsepower. The 1974 model had a new grille design, but its gas-guzzling V8 caused sales to drop more than 50%. By 1975, with only around 10,000 sold, the first generation Grand Am ended after just 3 years. Not even the Incredible Hulk could save this car. GM resurrected the Grand Am name in 1978 with an entirely different design, built on GM's smaller G platform, which was also used for the Pontiac Grand Prix and Le Mans, Chevy Monte Carlo and El Camino, Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, and Buick Regal. Although it also had 2- and 4-door models, the 4-door was dropped after 1979. There was even a concept version of the Grand Am as a rebadged El Camino, although that one never made it to production. With so many other similar cars in GM's lineup, slow sales killed the Grand Am a second time after the 1980 model year. Despite the Grand Am name failing twice before, GM gave it one more try in 1985 on a model intended to replace the unpopular Pontiac Phoenix, which was a rebadged Chevy Citation. This new platform, called the N-Body, was only shared with two other cars, the Buick Somerset, later to be called the Skylark, and the Oldsmobile Cutlass Calais. Of course, the old V8s were gone, now with a 2.5-liter 4 standard or an optional 3-liter V6. The 1985 Grand Am only offered a 2-door model, but by 1986, a 4-door was offered, as well as a sportier SE trim. The front-end square headlamps didn't last long, with composite headlamps starting on SE models in 1986. By 1987, a turbo 4-cylinder borrowed from the Pontiac Sunbird GT also became standard on the SE trim. It also marked the end of the quirky dashboard display, as the public had grown weary of the space-age look and preferred simpler, easier-to-read analog displays. And by 1988, the Oldsmobile Quad 4 engine replaced the 3-liter V6. By 1989, a mid-cycle refresh included a more aerodynamic front end and a new tail lamp design. The Grand Am was now far outselling its siblings from Oldsmobile and Buick, and was a huge hit compared to how Pontiac's last two attempts at a Grand Am had fared. The third generation Grand Am styling had a feature that, at least I thought of at the time, to be a bit odd, in that the front and rear bumpers appeared to wrap all the way around the car. Clearly not everyone thought that was odd back then, since by the end of the third generation in 1991, the Grand Am had become Pontiac's best-selling model. The body cladding on later generations would continue to hint at this wraparound bumper look, becoming a trademark design cue of the car, only being phased out in the last couple years of the Grand Am's entire run. Starting in 1992, the fourth generation Grand Am was an evolution of the third gen, incorporating more rounded edges that have become synonymous with 90s car design.
The new Pontiac Grand Am Sport Sedan. This is excitement. with purpose.
Make it so.
Its chassis was widened to match that of the Chevy Beretta and Corsica, and shared their suspension and braking systems. The V6 engine option also returned to supplement the base 2.3-liter four-cylinder and the Quad 4. A GT trim was now available with extra standard equipment, and of course also had a staple of 90s sports car styling, more body cladding. By 1996, another mid-cycle refresh resulted in revised front and rear fascias and even more body cladding. The Quad 4 engine was revised to now be a 2.4-liter double overhead twin cam, now making 150 horsepower. Although the 4th Gen Grand Am continued to share its platform with the Buick Skylark, the equivalent Oldsmobile was no longer a Cutlass, but instead was a new model called the Achieva. With the Grand Am sales still doing much better, it didn't take long for many to start calling this new Oldsmobile the Under Achieva, with it only lasting until 1998 and helping Oldsmobile's continued slide into oblivion. The Grand Am's 5th generation began with the 1999 model year. If you were a fan of the movie Lethal Weapon 4, you saw the 1999 Grand Am in that movie, which was a brand new car at the time, having only been released to the public 3 months before the movie's release in July of 1998. Although it was being driven by the good guys, it didn't exactly fare too well in the end.
Maybe a little too close.
The 5th gen was still using the N-body platform, which had now been redesigned to be slightly shorter but with a longer wheelbase. The 2.4-liter 4 carried over, but now the V6 was GM's 3400 model that had previously only been in their minivans, which made 170 horsepower. If the GT wasn't sporty enough looking for you, you could bump up to the SCT appearance package, which initially was a concept car for the SEMA show circuit, but later became a production car option starting in 2003. Considering the Pontiac Firebird was discontinued in 2002, this may have been Pontiac's attempt to keep some of its sports car heritage intact, albeit very briefly. There was even a convertible concept created, although it never went beyond the concept. By the time the 5th generation began, Oldsmobile had discontinued its poor-selling Achieva, replacing it with the Alero. The Alero has the distinction of being the very last Oldsmobile model ever built, over a year earlier than the last Grand Ams built in May of 2005. The Buick Skylark also was discontinued by 1999, so there was no longer an N-body car for Buick. However, the 5th generation of the Chevy Malibu began using a variation of the N-body platform back in 1997. By 2003, the wraparound body cladding was phased out on the less sporty SE models, as Pontiac started to tone down the extra cladding that seemed to become synonymous with Pontiac. Even the way overstyled Pontiac Aztek toned down its body cladding, although improved body cladding alone couldn't save that car. Definitely a good car for a future My Old Car episode. The Pontiac Grand Am was still selling well by 2005, but Pontiac was ready to move on to a new model name, the G6. The name G6 initially was a tie-in to the car it replaced, since it was, in a sense, the 6th generation of the Grand Am. In addition to 2- and 4-door models, the G6 was given a body style that the Grand Am only got as a concept, a convertible, although the G6 convertible had a retractable hardtop, which was great until you actually needed to put anything in the trunk, since almost the entire trunk was needed to store the roof. The G6 also has the distinction of being the very last Pontiac ever built in January of 2010. This naming convention, using the letter G followed by a number, eventually spread to 3 other Pontiac models. The best car of them all was the G8, which replaced the slow-selling GTO as Pontiac's top performance car. The V8-powered G8 was built in Australia by GM subsidiary Holden, and it was essentially a rebadged Holden Commodore. Holden also designed and built the Chevy SS, a 4-door V8 sports sedan intended to replace the G8, but it didn't launch until 2014. And so few SSs were ever sold that most people probably didn't even know it existed before it was quietly killed off in 2017, following the end of production for the Commodore. Pontiac also used the G number name in 2007 on its rebadged Chevy Cobalt, calling it the G5. Unlike the Cobalt, which had 2- and 4-door models, the G5 was only available in the US as a 2-door, but both 2- and 4-door models were available in Canada. But the worst of them all has to be the G3, which also debuted in 2007. Although it was given the name Wave in Canada, the G3 was simply a rebadged Chevy Aveo, built by Daewoo Motors in Korea. If there was ever a car that proved Pontiac had completely lost their way, and therefore losing their very purpose for existing, the G3 was it. Unlike the G3, the Grand Am at least made some attempt to maintain Pontiac's long-standing tradition as GM's performance car division. And although the Grand Am may not be the first car people think of when they think of Pontiac, The 3rd through 5th gen Grand Ams were among the best-selling cars Pontiac ever made, and Pontiac may not have survived as long as they did without it. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.